Hey, hey, welcome back to the Beyond the Sequence podcast. Amanda Archibald and Sarah Amadon are here speaking to you live from Indianapolis and from Grand Junction, Colorado. So, we're going to talk to you guys today about some of our key takeaways from the Integrative Healthcare Symposium that we were co presenting at in New York City back in February with our colleague Yael Joffe. And so, yeah, I think it was such a fantastic opportunity to spend time together and with our colleagues. And what was this conference about, Amanda? Do you want to go into that a little bit?
I think it's a conference that has morphed over the years, right? And it's a very big meeting of some very cutting edge and influential minds across functional medicine, functional nutrition, research, and attended by people who are looking for what's next in science, attended by, I would say, very seasoned practitioners. It's not a woo-woo conference. It's actually kind of really emerged into a sort of a leading conference, again, where some really good minds in science are meeting. I thought this was so interesting because I was last there, in 2017, 2018, I think. And there was just a handful of us. And now there was quite a big group. And it was really exciting for us as dietitians to be there because we're often not, it's not that dietitians aren't cutting edge at all. There's hundreds and hundreds of us in this space, but these were really excellent minds, I thought, that were attending from our field to merge with other fields.
Yeah, and this happened to be the 20-year anniversary.
Oh,
So we saw Jeff Bland, we saw Kathy Swift get honored for being one of the founders of this symposium. And Kathy Swift is, I call her one of the oracles of, the dietitian world because she's just been really having such a mind for the functional, and using nutrition as a way to optimize health. And she's influenced so many of the big names that we see,
it's amazing.
In the healthcare field today. So, yeah, the 20 years, and this was only my second year attending. So I attended for the first time last year and was like, this is amazing. And then I was so excited to be able to present just a year later, and you and Yael were so kind to say yes and on the proposal that you and I were discussing. So what did we present on, Amanda?
And it's so funny. Every time I say, Sarah, what is the name of the title of what we talked about? Because we knew exactly where we wanted to go with this with Yael. But essentially the title was Flying Blind, and the title slide actually had an aircraft on it, like a landing. I think it was landing, like huge, like 777 or whatever landing. Flying blind, can you afford, what was the rest of it, to be in practice without genomics?
Can you afford not to use genomics in your practice
exactly.
or with your patients?
And
we've been saying that for a long time. Like, this is what, turned me onto genomics altogether was, why aren't we doing this with every individual? And obviously I work with athletes too, but I'm like, I wish I had this for my sport, but this approach helped my overall health.
Exactly.
So Yael kind of laid the groundwork for us. And she's the founder of 3x4 Genetics that you and I work with and utilize their DNA test for. But then you and I presented the clinical piece and the clinical eye with what we're seeing in our practice and how we're utilizing that. So I opened, after Yael kind of laid the groundwork for, what is genomics, getting everyone up to speed on that. I gave the audience an opportunity for me to talk about one of two cases. I had an athlete that, was having some brain fog and some fatigue, low energy. And then I had another case that I presented that the audience ended up picking that was on like mast cell activation. And so even Yael, as she was preparing for the talk, she said, oh, it's histamine. She's like, you guys really got me there. I for sure thought that the histamine overload was going to be the up and front obvious answer to that, but it wasn't. It was oxidative stress.
So it was like we were almost glad that the audience chose that because we knew they would choose it because what is trending is mast cell activation along with hypothyroidism and SIBO. It's like everyone has it, right? So we kind of knew that sure enough, 80%, if not all of the audience said, oh, it's going to be, what's going to show up is histamine overload. And it was, I mean, it was relevant, but if you were looking at the patterns of the genes, it wasn't in the picture. So they were, oh, it was, I actually had a mom and daughter this week where the daughter, you know, a lot of health issues. And her mother's very well read. And sure enough, we brought up her DNA and they both said, we could have sworn that histamine would be at the root. And sure enough, exact same case. I said, now let me tell you what my colleague presented in New York. And it was the exact same case. And I'm like, wow, you know, this is really something when we're kind of revealing root cause or we're looking at patterns in DNA to guide thinking as to where to look. So that was brilliant.
And then my case study was sort of like an intro, intro level. And then you took us to the 300, 400 level with how to look at homocysteine and the role of bone metabolism. And I thought that was fantastic. That's definitely your wheelhouse. Is there anything you wanted to, just briefly expound on what you're seeing in that space?
Yeah, and it's interesting. I was just it should have been an hour podcast in Australia a couple of days ago, and they pulled me in to talk about a number of things, but the focus of this one was on bone health or bone disease. And once again, they were blown away, not because I was speaking, but how I was able to explain that DNA guides us to look for in places where we're not thinking. It pulls up the dark, dirty corners. And I was actually showing them that, exactly as you heard me present in New York, there were 5 areas that I'm starting to see associated with bone health. 3 of them we didn't talk about in New York because we had such a short amount of time. But yeah, homocysteine was key. A disruption to lipid panels, so elevated LDL can actually activate bone turnover, so osteoclastic activity or bone remodeling, but negatively. You're losing bone, not gaining. Role of estrogen as a hormone, the role of the vagus nerve and the immune system, and critically the role of bile acids. We probably should talk about this on another show because it's so interesting how it overlaps all our work, but mainly probably 3 of those areas I was able to talk about and show how it pushed us into the science to validate what we're seeing. So it's not like we suddenly discovered the unknown. We discovered through patterns, connections that when you go back to the science, you say, oh yeah, we know that in the science. Now the science isn't saying, well, look at these gene SNPs and you'll see this. That's actually what we're uncovering in clinical practice, which is useful. So that was us at IHS.
Yeah, and I would say, one of the biggest things that in genomics that you and I ask for as far as lab results is we got to see that homocysteine level, that number, because it's so integral into, methylation and the folate pathway that, we'll talk about in another podcast coming up soon. But what was your favorite lecture, a couple of lectures that really you came away from going, wow, these people are doing some really good work?
Yeah, and of course, the first one, all 3 of us were sitting there like, we weren't like statues, we were animated people in the audience because the presenter, Dr. Habib, was presenting last year on the vagus nerve. And I know you were texting me from that presentation. So we came back this year and I guess he updated and even upgraded that presentation. So you and I and Amy were sitting there taking notes, and he actually introduced the lens of nitric oxide this year, I guess, which he hadn't talked about last year. But he really brought together the critical role of the vagus nerve. And so let's talk about that. Let's talk about what the vagus nerve does, and how that impacts like the immune system, heart rate variability, and all the things. And then let's just talk about that. Like, wow, we didn't think about that with nitric oxide.
Yeah, I love vagus nerve talk. And I know Amy McCrae is who we're referring to, our colleague and friend, and she was my classmate in Eastern Michigan. So I pulled her into genomics with me, whether she wanted to or not, but she loves gut stuff. So she's a gut GI specialist, and her work in gut health is integral with vagus nerve work. So we do, so much with the nutritional piece, but if we're not working on our vagus nerve, which we call the wandering nerve, it runs, up and down the body in so many different areas. And the research that I did with my thesis paper on an esophageal cancer patient is that during that type of surgery, esophagectomy, we're actually cutting the vagus nerve. And then we have a big problem with rest and digest versus fight or flight. We're not having the gastric secretions that we need in order to digest our food well. But the research I was reading when I was writing this paper was that any surgery can impact the vagus nerve. And I have noticed a trend with some women who've had like C-sections, which is, not even, in the middle of the abdomen or anything like that, but they're having major GI issues after even their C-section, having babies. So, but yeah, Amy is a big fan of vagus nerve work, and we can measure vagal tone with heart rate variability. So if you're someone who wears a fitness tracker or Whoop strap or something like that, you can actually measure vagal tone. And Dr. Habib would be so excited to hear this, and I'll definitely send him our podcast when we're done. But that's a big takeaway too, because it's actually measurable. And in a long COVID patient that I've been working with for the last few months, she had a fitness tracker on, and she said my heart rate variability improved by 20 points since starting to work with me. And so that it really comes to play all of the things, maybe you could speak more to the nitric oxide piece too. Just the ways in which we can actually measure and keep an eye on how the body's functioning using vagus nerve.
Yeah, and with your patient where you improved her heart rate variability by 20 points, how did you do that? What was your strategy? How did she do it?
Yeah, I've been working with a number of chronic illness patients, Lyme disease, long COVID, and what's happening with chronic infection. And I have my own story with Lyme and Babesia and Epstein-Barr in my own life, is that you're really just battling oxidative stress constantly. So regardless of what your genetics look like for, high impact genes, if you have an infection, you just can't shake it. We have to address oxidative stress. And I love doing that with sulforaphane. I love doing that with our melon extract that improves, superoxide.
You can name it.
Yep. I love our Cell Logic, Christine Houghton. I love you. She's incredible.
Yes.
So her Defense Cell product really
We
has
both
helped
use
a
them.
number of clients, or the Enduracell. And then our cofactors with selenium, sometimes molybdenum, down that transsulfuration pathway, depending on what we're seeing. So, yeah, sulforaphane.
Sulforaphane and choline, we're going to come back to that. So I actually took some notes. So let's go through it, because I think it's useful, because our audience may be practitioners who may not be working with the vagus nerve, or maybe all of you are, but also, public at large and family members, et cetera, so they may not know what we're talking about. So here were my notes that I took from his lecture, and you can jump in, right? So the vagus nerve actually stimulates or triggers acetylcholine release. So what does acetylcholine do? Well, it's actually instrumental to gut motility, right? It actually kind of can fire up peristalsis and get the gut moving. So many of our patients have gut-related issues, and that's a whole other podcast right there, how we may look at the gut and treat the gut. But acetylcholine, for all the people who have brain fog, is instrumental to helping fire information in the brain, so that it helps fire communication across between neurons so that they can talk to each other. So, and we see this so often as women and men go into midlife, or maybe adults with ADHD, where they can say they are actually assertive enough to realize that they can't connect the dots. So I had a patient yesterday who said it was almost like I could step up to the precipice, but I couldn't get across to the other side with my thinking. And, there's so many things at play, but acetylcholine is critical there. And one of the things, Sarah, I didn't tell you, is I went up to Dr. Habib in the exhibit hall, so he was a presenter, and said, there were three of us sitting out who all work in genomics or nutrition. The issue, the vagus nerve, or is the issue that the vagus nerve, once it fires, it doesn't have any information. And we're talking about what it takes to create the acetyl molecule. and what it takes to create the choline molecule, the two molecules that come together. And if you don't have that information, or you're genetically compromised, like we see over and over again, then you can do a lot of work, to fire the vagus nerve is what I was thinking, but then it doesn't have a tool. The acetylcholine is the tool that is used or induced, I guess, once the vagus nerve is activated. But I think it's cyclical, right? Because the vagus nerve can activate acetylcholine, which itself can activate the vagus nerve. Am I right? Is it cyclical, or is it just one way?
That's a great question. I don't actually know the answer to
I
that.
think it's the vagus nerve potentiates acetylcholine. So I think so. Yeah. See, we don't know everything here, but that's the way I learned it anyway. But what's interesting? So let me just read what it does. I just find this amazing. So acetylcholine is the primary neurotransmitter or hormone released by the vagus nerve. It binds to these very specific receptors. So they're called the muscarinic and the nicotinic receptors, which influence, you ready, heart rate, digestion, and other parasympathetic functions. So it is this critical structure that nobody really talks about. It's like, it comes as a benefit with the human body. But the other thing that I think is so key is this point. And again, me taking notes, acetylcholine plays a key role in the cholinergic anti-inflammatory pathway, and it binds to these nicotinic receptors I was just mentioning on macrophages. So macrophages are in the immune system, and by doing that, they reduce inflammation by inhibiting probably the most pro-inflammatory molecule in the body, which might be what, Sarah? But she does. Our good friend TNF alpha. So this is like this master, like raging pro-inflammatory molecule that we often see upregulated in genetics, or we see it as being high impact, meaning it's very easily excitable, if you will. So here you have this brilliant structure which we can activate, and I want to talk about how we do that, Sarah, because you and Amy were using a device, but there was another device that we were talking about at IHS. But if you're able to activate the vagus nerve and it can produce acetylcholine, then one of the benefits is it acts as an anti-inflammatory. So it tamps down a very inflammatory molecule, which we all have. We all are blessed with this, has a role. But it can also activate IL-10, which is what we call a brake in the immune system. So it helps the immune system to settle down. So you have this brilliant, inborn mechanism to facilitate digestion, to actually help settle the heart rate, right? So we talked about heart rate variability, but it also can generate or push the heart to bradycardia, so slow down the heart, prevent arrhythmias, which would be amazing to see in athletes when I'm thinking about that, or anyone. But so you can imagine we're not only listening to the lecture, we haven't talked about nitric oxide yet, but we're sitting there thinking, but there's a genetic component here. If you can't create the tool, it doesn't matter what you're doing with the vagus nerve. I mean, you're going to get a benefit, but you're not releasing that tool. I thought it was amazing. So
Yeah, fantastic. And I just appreciate, Dr. Habib is always wanting to learn. He's clearly loves learning. And last year after I sat in his talk, or during the talk, he brought up choline during, his vagus nerve talk. And I verbally out loud said yes. And he was like, "Oh, I'm onto something."
somebody knows.
Yep. And so we spoke after his talk, and he was like, "So what did you think about, the connections I was making with choline?" I was like, "You are
Right
right on
on.
target." So I think it was probably really encouraging for him to go, "Okay, well, if the dietitians and genomics are supporting what I'm saying, I'm going to keep going." And so,
And he came back with
yeah,
even more, right? So the
yeah.
nitric oxide piece is, because I had to go back and look at my notes because it was just so exciting when we were sitting there. So nitric oxide also enhances the release of acetylcholine, and there's a lot of genetics. We immediately can think we may get to it, and when we're talking about folate and folic acid in that podcast, we can talk about how those cycles can impact nitric oxide production. But nitric oxide enhances the release of acetylcholine, thereby augmenting, it says, the parasympathetic, so the calming effects that are mediated by the vagus nerve. But what got me so interested is, and I remember I was like, I looked to Amy because Amy was between us. I said, wait a minute here. So nitric oxide plays this critical role in on sphincters in the body. I'm like, wait a minute here. Do you remember him talking about that? And we was like,
I do.
oh
I do. I
my
hadn't heard that
gosh.
one yet, but I believe it. Yeah.
Well, when I think about what you did your thesis on, and we've had many patients with reflux, and I never thought about the connection with nitric oxide, and how we can maybe activate that or help produce that, not only internally, but using something externally therapeutically to help with the sphincter control, basically, any sphincter in the body.
Yeah, including the ileocecal valve, which is
Bingo.
the sort of the bridge between, the small intestine and going into the large intestine, which if that sphincter stays open, we have SIBO.
We have
We've
SIBO.
got we have overgrowth of bacteria and fungi, so that is crucial.
So if you think about it, maybe you can do like amazing chiropractic work and massage work on that ileocecal valve, right? Which I think is incredible. You can learn to do it yourself. Fortunately, I've not had to, but the idea that you could introduce not only choline, but foods, yeah, I never think of foods there are no foods rich in nitric oxide. There are foods that are rich in nitrates, but we can facilitate nitric oxide production biochemically. That to me is a thought or a therapy is brilliant. And so basically he said, exactly, nitric oxide relaxes the lower esophageal sphincter to let food into the stomach, and also the other side out of the stomach, but then from the small intestine to the large intestine, and then out of the large intestine. So not only like the anal sphincter too. And you think about that. I mean, now I'm sitting thinking to you, we're so busy trying to quote fix the gut. Of course, you and I work extensively with a protocol, and Cell Logic, but not exclusively with that, but extensively. But now there's these other tools we have, like thinking about what's going on with choline, acetylcholine, what's going on with nitric oxide production. What can we pour in to help people, improve gut motility, which is probably half the issue anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I thought that was brilliant. All that was like 15 minutes on Dr. Habib. Thank you. It was all about the vagus nerve and nitric oxide, which was brilliant.
Yeah. Did you have any other lectures that you really enjoyed, or, some pearls of wisdom from our forefathers and foremothers?
Forefathers and foremothers. Well, let's end on those like three pearls, but we can't not talk about our friend Kathy Swift. She was talking about nutritional strength. You were in that lecture too, right? It was.
I was not. I was
Oh,
not.
yeah.
I chose another one. It was really, really hard. There's like 5 talks
At the
going on
same
at the same
time.
time. And I was like, well, who would I? My husband was so good. He's like, well, if you would want to ask this person a question, you should be in that talk. And I was like, yeah, you're right.
Yeah, I was curious, because I'm so interested in bone health. Well, sarcopenia sort of resides side by side, right? I mean, you can be sarcopenic and have good bone health, and the other way around too. But she was talking about sarcopenia, the progressive loss of skeletal muscle, and what are the risk factors, et cetera, et cetera. But what's interesting to talk about are the nutritional strategies, and lo and behold. One of them, number one, is to ensure sufficient protein intake, 1.2 to 1.5 grams per kilogram per day for older adults. And of course, we've been fighting this for a long time, anything over 0.8, unless you're really sick, we're underestimating protein intake. And, it's not only are we underestimating it, but it's hard. It does get harder as you get older. Your appetite changes. If you're stressed, you don't eat as much. And I don't know about you, Sarah, but I will drink a smoothie, but I'm not someone who makes a bunch of drinks and adds stuff to it. I try and get it through food. You have to work hard to get to that much protein, but you can do it. It's easy enough to do, but you have to think about it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. And I think since we have listeners here, just the RDA for protein intake is 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight. And we're finding more and more that that's just not enough. That's if you're in bed not doing anything. But as soon as you add any kind of activity into your day, we really need at least 1 gram per kilogram body weight. But higher for those who are seniors. Definitely that 1.3 is probably a better goal. My athletes, it's
Oh,
1.5
at
or
least,
2 or
yeah.
2.5.
Yeah.
So the more activity we have, the more our protein intake needs to go up. And then after a workout is the best time to, utilize protein within about 30 to 60 minutes after you do a workout is my colleague and friend Lindsay Langford, a sports dietitian, said your muscles are like little Pac-Men and they're like ready for
Oh,
that
that's
protein
truly,
uptake.
yeah,
And yeah, I like that visual that she gives with that. So
especially with
for
athletes.
athletes or seniors who are working on their bone health and lifting heavy and their muscle, trying to increase muscle mass, is you want to make sure that you're not working out fasted. We want some kind of carbohydrate at the beginning. It could be a banana, it could be a fig bar. It doesn't need to be a lot. And then we don't want to wait much more than an hour after a workout to make sure we've got a protein and
Something.
carbohydrate rich meal afterwards. And of course, we love our color. And so Lindsay also says, on your plate as an athlete, you want a carbohydrate, a protein, and a
There you
color.
go.
And I know, especially for kids, talking to them about what their plate should look like, you hear color versus like fruits or vegetables. Well, what does that even mean? um, you know, Potatoes, French fries, that's a vegetable, right? Or so carbohydrate, a protein, and a color,
That's
I think
clever.
is a great visual.
Because a
Yeah. So
blueberry
I
is a color, right? A raspberry is a color.
Mhm.
So that's cool. An
Yeah,
orange is a color. That's a great idea.
yeah. Add color to your plate for those
100%.
antioxidants and vitamin C and so many good nutrients that are synergistically combined.
They do the heavy lifting of the body. They do. They're the quiet, like, communicators to your genes with the information that color communicates with your genes. How about that one?
Mm-hmm.
So the other thing she said,
Absolutely.
and this has definitely been trending, and you could speak to it more than me, in terms of nutritional strategies. So we're still in protein, really focus on essential amino acids, but crucial for protein, for muscle synthesis, of course, branched chain amino acids, but there's a star among them, which would be leucine. So leucine, isoleucine, and valine are the three branched chains. And I was thinking about this that, well, of course, because branched chain amino acids, we know in the science, are anabolic. And what do? They activate mTOR, which is an anabolic pathway. So definitely seeing a lot of like almost trending to a single amino acid now where leucine is a star. And I don't know if because you have anything to say about that. Maybe it's more your world than mine. I thought it was interesting.
Yeah, I mean, we can use branched chain amino acids, as a sports enhancement kind of thing. And there's some research to suggest that. But also, if you're eating a lot of protein in general,
You're
you're
going to
going to
get it.
get, a variety of those branched chain amino acids anyways. So I personally, it's like if I had to choose what I was going to focus on, branched chain amino acids are probably lower on that list for me. I would say creatine would
Yeah,
be a
true for
higher
energy.
priority for me than branched chain amino acids. And then, just managing oxidative stress for athletes, the
100%. This
occupational hazard.
thing that's not talked about is always sort of focusing on like performance. Well, obviously performance, but the recovery piece is actually more important, and that's where we're seeing these really high levels of oxidative stress, and which I guess in the end catch up with people who are performing at such a high level, right? If you're not ahead of that, it's going to show up in injury or performance somewhere.
Yeah.
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 She also, so nutritional strategy, sufficient protein, the branched chain amino acids with a focus on leucine. This is coming from the research. It's not, hey, this is a good idea. This is actually from the research. Omega-3 fatty acids support muscle function, reduce inflammation. Didn't know about the muscle function, but the inflammation piece, of course. And vitamin D and calcium, important for muscle strength. Okay, so there's two other areas. She said, dietary patterns, like this thing, like, is there a dietary pattern that is, as you kind of come through the research, that would be associated with better outcomes, so lower levels of sarcopenia. And you have to sort of look at that at a top level. But she said the Mediterranean diet associated with better muscle strength and function. The Japanese diet, the washoku diet, which is more like rice, seafood, vegetables, broccoli, and minimal fruits. It's like pears and apples of all things. So it was interesting. And tofu is sort of like, so it's a traditional Japanese diet linked to lower mortality. We know that, but lower sarcopenia risk. I thought that was interesting. And again, this is your presenting from the science, not just like, hey, this is a great idea. And of course, plant-based, you said, but plant-based diets require careful planning, of course, to ensure adequate protein and leucine intake, because leucine would be lower, I think, in plants. I think like corn is one of the sources. I'd have to look and see. You might know better than me, but so I thought that was interesting. And then you'll be very,
Yeah,
go ahead.
oh, I was going to say the Japanese diet sounds very interesting. The first thing that popped into my mind would be like isoflavones and,
Bingo.
supporting estrogenic pathways and, all of that. That comes to mind with just sort of the tofu and the edamame and,
Exactly.
they have much more soy and less processed soy, but it's like most of it will be
Fermented,
fermented
yeah,
soy.
whole or
Hmm.
fermented, yeah, very interesting. Kind of doing
That
triple
is fascinating.
duty in the body. But
Hmm.
again, she was looking at it through the lens of kind of nutritional strength and sarcopenia, which is muscle loss. Not necessarily as we age; it could be at any age when you think about it. Some people
Yeah,
are starting
these
out not
the
well.
flu illnesses that have been going on, this winter, the flu's been really, really bad, and their appetites are down and they're losing weight. So, trying to bounce back after that flu A and B, and
Yeah, no kidding.
ooh, it was a rough sickness season.
Really? I thought the last area, then we have to kind of talk about our pearls that she talked about, will be right on your alley. What do we know from supplements or strategic use of nutrients? Again, through the research, looking at sarcopenia prevention. Best way to prevent sarcopenia, I would say, is to move and to eat. Eat sufficient protein and move, right? And so she did talk a lot about, muscle building, strength building. But supplements and nutrients, creatine, Sarah, there it is. It has his muscle strength and endurance. Hello, number one. The second one, you would know more about than me, beta hydroxy beta methylbutyrate, or HMB. Is this new on the scene, or it's been trending for a while, or?
Yeah, I feel like the immunology course with our colleague, I think she may have talked about that briefly, but it could be used, either that could be used or there was something else. And I'm pulling from the archives in my brain. I've seen it once or twice. I
Yeah.
haven't used it too much, but I have seen it. And there are other things that work in a similar pathway, but I don't recall the mechanism for
Yeah,
that.
no, it was something I needed to go and look up. It supports muscle protein synthesis and reduces degradation. So that's interesting. It may have this role in oxidative stress too. If Stacy would have mentioned it, our colleague in immunology, there would be an immune role. You see, we did not look this up, listeners. It was just like things that Kathy had talked about, and I remember at the time thinking, oh, I don't know that. Just
Well, it might be something that I think maybe sulforaphane is something I used instead,
yeah,
and
okay.
maybe didn't need it as much. Yeah, I'll have to go back and look that up.
Yeah, it's interesting. And then, of course, polyphenols. They may help prevent, from the literature, muscle atrophy through antioxidant and anti-inflammatory effects. Of course, polyphenols, those little non-caloric, non-nutritive little signaling molecules in food, in plant food, that do the heavy lifting of communicating to our genes, right? Turning them on,
Yeah,
turning them
and
off.
maybe someday you and I will rewrite the book on what our essential nutrients are, because we've got, water, we've got our three macronutrients, fat, carbohydrate, protein, but we've got vitamins and minerals. But I think you and I have seen enough in our own practice and in the literature to suggest that bioactive compounds like polyphenols and molecules like sulforaphane have such a powerful role that I don't think, those six basic nutrients would operate without them. And
Right, and because they're found in plants versus animals, it calls into question how a human being can exist on a carnivore only diet, because at some point, how does the communication kind of occur throughout the body? How do genes communicate with each other if they don't have the information from these polyphenols, which include like flavonoids, terpenes, rosmarinic acid, and like rosemary, all these things, ellagic acid, tannic, coumarin, find in olive oil. So all of these are plants. Yeah. So anyway, that was really interesting from Kathy. Just like, just what's the research? And that's what she was talking about. What is the research? What do we know? And what's the strategies to prevent sarcopenia alongside, building strength, like, the hard work of building strength. So, all right. So we were going to end on some pearls we learned, or wrote down. Do you remember any? Did you, I mean, what did you
I
find?
think I know we discussed a little bit before we started recording, but you kind of took some of the ones that I was considering. So I was like, well, I guess we're on the same wavelength. I did really enjoy the panel discussion with Jeffrey
Yeah.
Bland, David Perlmutter, Sarah Gottfried, Kara Fitzgerald. They were fantastic. That, like, hearing those pearls of wisdom and just their discussion is kind of why we started our podcast too, where it's like I want to be a fly on the wall. Like, what are things that clinicians talk about? And sometimes I get tears in my eyes because I'm like, yes, they get it, and Dr. Habib, you get it,
I
and
do.
so I think I really enjoyed that talk quite a bit as well. So, but yeah, what were your little pearls?
And I actually took the pearls from that talk. I was listening, and I think I was actually posting to social media at the same time. Oh, that's such a good pearl. So Sarah in that talk said there's no health fallout from eating vegetables. It's like,
Yeah.
end this story. There is no downside to eating a vegetable, right? And we can argue about how it's grown, where it's grown, if it's sustainable, organic, or not organic. There's no health fallout to the vegetable itself, period.
Yeah, and I would say Christine Houghton has expressed that, in the research that she's, read, is that, even if we've got pesticides, herbicides that are involved in the growing of those plants, the, polyphenols and, the fiber, like just the richness of a vegetable really does overcome that. So it's one of those good, better, best scenarios. If you're someone who's extremely sensitive, trying to eat as cleanly and organically as possible is probably wise for you. But as far as like being afraid of eating fruits and vegetables, that is not a message that I ever want anyone to walk away with
Right.
from a conversation with me, is like, be afraid of your food because that's going to, impact your vagus nerve, and then we're not going to be digesting it. Your brain has already blocked, the absorption and metabolism of that food before you've ever put it in your mouth. So how we feel when we eat is almost as important as what we're eating. And if we have a lot
Good
of
point.
fear around food, we're in big trouble.
And something, this made me think of another pearl of a pearl. Again, when I was on a podcast in Australia, we were talking about bone health, but it comes back to eating vegetables. When you eat vegetables and fruit and legumes, and if you can tolerate some grains, that's not a discussion of don't eat grains or fear of grains. It's, eating these foods are a source of fiber, if they're in the whole form, for the gut. And so this is such a pearl, Sarah. So, when you have a healthy gut, you have a healthy proliferation, diverse of bacteria. And some of those bacteria are responsible for transforming bile acids into secondary bile acids, which are these become active signaling molecules. And so when that happens, that signaling will actually activate another molecule called TRA5. And do you know what that does? This is like brilliant.
No, I
Are you
don't.
ready?
I'm
You're
learning.
the
I'm learning here.
It activates GLP-1. So all the
Oh,
way from your microbiome to, helping to break down and produce these secondary bile acids. They are signaling molecules. That's how the body works. Activates a molecule, activates GLP-1. And the reason this came up when I was talking about bone health, which we didn't talk about in New York, is because GLP-1 will then activate osteoblasts that help with bone formation. It's brilliant, right? So once again, you go all the way back to the diet, to the gut, to help, in the proliferation of bacteria. And that always goes back to, well, there's no health fallout from eating vegetables, unless there's something you can't tolerate. But I thought that was amazing.
Yeah, fiber equals bone health.
Yeah,
We
fiber
also have
equals bone
X
health.
cardiovascular, which means fiber equals homocysteine levels are managed well.
100%.
Oh, full
Hello.
circle.
Two other pearls then. This was some pearls from David Perlmutter. Where did he asked, where did the idea come from that, or no, excuse me, where did the idea that food is manufactured come from? Food is not manufactured, it's grown. And he
Mm,
kind of like mic drop moment. Yep. And he was just like
yep.
pontificate, or no, he musing. He was not pontificate. He was just musing. He was like, where did that come from? Food is not manufactured. It's a very good point. We're not talking about
Yeah,
processed or
it's really
unprocessed. We're
cool
talking about
concept.
manufactured, extruded, put into forms and shapes that we don't see in fields. Okay, if you're a kid, it's kind of fun, right? But it was just a good point. And then the third one,
Yeah.
go ahead. Do you have a comment on that?
No, I just think that like let that just lie,
Yeah, food is not
Meditate
manufactured.
on that one today.
Yeah, meditate on that one. Third one, if we want to make America great again, start with the soil. It has its own immune system. That was Jeffrey Bland. If you want to make America
Mm,
great again, start with the soil. It has its own immune system too, because he was talking
yeah.
about the immune system. That's very much his platform right now. So, yeah, those are
Yeah.
three like very cool like thoughts or musings from these presenters at IHS.
Yeah, that was great. And I mean, Jeffrey Bland, I remember before they started their panel discussion, he brought it all home to suggest, climate change really is the foundation for our overall health in a number of ways. The way food is grown, how our bodies are metabolizing it. We're seeing mast cell activation everywhere now, which to me is just a message that we've got, leaky junctions in the gut,
100%.
and we've got food proteins leaking into the bloodstream, and then we're going to see IgG or IgE allergies because your body's like, wait a second, you don't belong here. What are you doing in the bloodstream? Get out of here. And your body's going to mount an immune
It
response to
is.
that. So I know it's easy to panic about all these things, but it's like, no, it's your body's very wise, and it's smart to try to get those food proteins out of your blood where they don't belong. But that we just have gut work, and stress will impact, gut junctions as well as, toxicity, toxic burden. So
And when you talk about that, it made me think, going all the way back, I must have had three patients this week where, yeah, that's not uncommon. There's this significant gut issues. They've been going on for quote 30 years. Like, how can you live that long with this? Well, they've been trying, right? But immediately I'm thinking to them, the vagus nerve. This is one of the strategies. Is the vagus nerve will do a lot of work for you in terms of moving things forward, through, and out. But it also, as we said much earlier on, it helps to pacify the immune system. So we have to work sort of in front in the gut, right, to prevent that crosstalk with the immune system, the illicit crosstalk, the damaging crosstalk. We also have to work behind the gut wall too to kind of pacify or soothe the immune system. And the vagus nerve is one of the ways to do that. So I wanted to, I know we're getting towards the end here. Talk to us about the device that you and Amy were using. You had to bop into her room in New York, and you said, "Oh, I just spent a little bit of time with her sensor." Is it a sensor device? And you don't say why you were using it, but what does
sensate.
it do?
Yeah, great question. Bringing it back home to the vagus nerve, kind of where we started some of our talk. But Dr. Habib talks about using a device called True Vega, which kind of is like a TENS unit that you
Yeah.
put right over, near that artery on the neck. And your vagus nerve runs kind of behind your ear and down the neck. So you can do that for like 2 minutes at a time to do a direct vagus nerve activation, or Amy and I use a device called Sensate, which is
Sensate. That's it. Sensate.
Sensate, yep. This like vibrating pendant that hooks up to an app on your phone that plays kind of calming, think like spa like music. If you're going in and like having a cup of tea before your massage or something, that it vibrates like with it and to that specific music. So, before our talk, I get nervous and my heart rate's going up, and my appetite's down. And this happens to everyone before public speaking to some degree, but, it's So I did a little 10-minute sensate with my deep belly breath, and was just looking over the slides, laying down in Amy's room for a few minutes before I came downstairs. But it really is so helpful just to have something like that on a plane, if you're traveling and get anxious when you're traveling, or if you live in a stressful work life balance or something like that, to where you can take some time to do some meditation, or use it before bed to
Hmm.
calm the vagus nerve, to improve your digestion and stress response. So I do really love it. There's even one musical feature that's like a cat purring. So you hear the cat purring and you feel the cat purring on your chest.
Oh
And
my
it's
gosh,
like,
that's
how wonderful
brilliant.
to,
That's like
I
having a
know.
baby, like a cat
Hmm.
or a dog snoring or whatever, or a baby. That's beautiful. And that is it called True Vega? You said it's like a TENS device.
Hmm.
I was
Yeah.
at their booth in on the exhibit floor and chatting away, and unfortunately, a lady just I guess this happens, it came it zoomed right in front. I'm like, what? He was just about to talk to me and do a demo. Well, that went out the window, but I since kind of signed up to learn more with the company. But one of the things I found absolutely amazing, to the point about how this resettles and helps like fire the vagus nerve to bring that calm, reduce inflammation, is he was showing it to me and talking to me, and I immediately said, oh my gosh, this would be amazing for the military. Sure enough, they actually have produced one for like special forces or Navy SEALs. What I think it was more special forces, but to me they're all the same. There's elite soldiers, airmen, sailors, I guess Marines, so that when they're in the thick of it and they have to come out and reset, it's actually like in a combat case, and they're using it
Wow.
to hand. I said, oh my gosh,
I love that use.
huh? Isn't it?
I said I love that use. I think that's
It's
amazing.
brilliant.
They come home with PTSD, and how are you going to
I
manage
think
that?
it should come with
Mhm.
for every veteran who's seen combat, whatever. But I also think maybe in psychiatric care or in memory care, or in these very stressful environments where somebody may not be able to communicate. But that just the science of that, and what that could do. I don't know anything about that, but the part with the military just really stood out to me. And what just so many of our veterans suffer from silently, PTSD across all ages. And our highest suicide rates are our veterans, right? The highest homeless rates are often our veterans. And yet there's this device, like, wow. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, we're big fans.
absolutely.
Big fans.
Yeah. Love the vagus nerve. We came away with new excitement, to share with you guys for our episode today, kind of recapping our IHS experience. And obviously, I loved speaking and co-presenting with Amanda and Yale, and
That's great.
hopefully we'll get to collaborate again soon. But is there anything else you wanted to share about IHS, or
I think that was
before we?
it. No, it was great. It was fun to be in New York. I had a fun breakfast and meals, and just fun seeing folks. But yeah, it's been a little bit since I've been at a conference, and so it was really nice. It kind of I hate leaving Colorado, but it was fun to go to New York for a little bit, and yeah, to have some good spirit.
Yeah, and I think it was maybe the most well attended by
That's what I
dietitians
heard.
this year.
Yeah.
And we had our academy president that
Mhm.
was in attendance at our talk, and I really enjoyed
Yeah.
chatting with her, Liveline Gill, and speaking with her after.
Yeah.
And yeah, so just dietitians sharing time, sharing meals together, and
Yeah.
Jeannie throwing an amazing dinner for us, our living plate
Yeah.
friend.
Good
Yeah,
fun.
so it was wonderful. Yeah. So, yeah, thanks for tuning in today to Beyond the Sequence, and we're looking forward to sharing another episode with you soon.
We'll see you on the next one.
Signing off.